Some stories make you shiver, some make you question what's real. Here you'll get both. Welcome to Eerily Entertaining, where the strange, the chilling, and the unexplained come to life. The rain beat a steady rhythm on the asphalt. In the dark sky above, the rumble of distant thunder rolled slowly towards us. Daniel! The sound of my name pulled me from my thoughts. I turned my head away from the drenched playground and towards Miss Wasson. "Are you with us?" she asked. Resting a hand on the edge of my desk, I nodded, unconsciously, my mind a million miles away. I looked to the watch on her wrist. It was a beautiful timepiece, a circular face surrounded by a gold bezel, with a wide two-tone bracelet. Fine golden hands pointed to the time. Just a little before 4. It would be another half hour before I would be able to escape. "Daniel," she said again. "Yes," I answered quickly, looking up at her. "Yes," I repeated, somewhat sheepishly. The corner of Miss Wasson's mouth turned upward in a slight smile as she moved back towards her desk. My sole companion sitting at the desk next to mine waved a finger, mimicking a scolding. I ignored her. My eyes drifted back outside. Dark, dreary, and wet. It was the perfect metaphor for a Friday afternoon detention. I tried to force my attention back towards my math textbook, but I found myself unable to concentrate. Miss Wasson, Emma, my detention buddy, said, "Can I go yet?" Unwilling to try and force myself through my next math problem, I focused on Miss Wasson instead. I had assumed she was somewhere around 40, judging by the laughter lines tugging at the corner of her eyes and the faint wrinkles on her eyebrows and the faint wrinkles on her brow. She was an attractive woman, tall and fit, with her dark brown hair cut short. Her jaw was pronounced, giving her the look of a fighter. While she had always been kind and patient with me, she could be fearful when angry. She tapped the face of her watch. In response to Emma's question, "Mr. Dawes made it clear to me you were to remain in detention until 4. It's nearly 4 now, and when it's exactly 4, you may go." Miss Wasson looked at me, and I flushed as my gaze lingered too long on her. I looked down at my textbook as she approached. "How are you finding these?" she asked quietly. "Fine," I lied. I was a smart kid, but always struggled with numbers. I had flunked the previous night's homework so badly that Miss Wasson had placed me in detention so I could catch up. I watched as she traced a finger down my work so far. "Good," she said, "but slow. I'm expecting you to have this complete before." Emma's scream pierced the classroom. Both Miss Wasson and I jumped as one. "Emma Delaney," Miss Wasson shouted, quickly regaining her composure. "What do you think you're doing?" Emma raised a shaky hand, but said nothing. I watched as my teacher's expression softened. "Emma, what is it?" I looked out to the darkening playground, expecting to see someone staring through the window, but there was no one there. "Emma," Miss Wasson placed a hand on her shoulder. "I saw Henry," Emma squealed. I felt myself swallow hard. "Oh, for the love of..." Some of Miss Wasson's fire returned. "Emma, I will not have you disrupt Daniel with some childish story." "I saw him," Emma repeated. Watery eyes looked up at Miss Wasson. It crawled under the cabinet." Doubt flashed across Miss Wasson's features. For a brief second, she looked at her watch, then back to Emma with a heavy sigh. "You may go," she said after a few seconds of deliberation. Emma didn't need a second invitation. She didn't bother packing her bag. She simply grabbed it, her books, and bolted for the door. I listened to the fading footsteps, faded as Emma raced down the corridor. "Henry," Miss Wasson laughed softly as she sat on Emma's now empty desk. "Not a bad way to buy yourself a couple of minutes out of detention, I suppose." "I've heard other people say they've seen him too," I offered. Everyone had heard stories. Miss Wasson's smile was kind. "I've been teaching here for close to 20 years now, Daniel. The Henry story has been going well before I started. Don't let Emma's acting spook you. I would never have thought Emma to be clever enough to think of pulling such a stunt, or talented enough to be so convincing." "She seemed pretty sure," I offered quietly, trying to ignore the small flash of shame. "At 15, I was too old to get spooked by ghost stories." "You don't believe her, do you?" Miss Wasson's tone suggested patience, with a hint of disappointment, as if she had expected more of me. Before I could deny anything, Miss Wasson had stood up and moved back towards the front of the class. I watched as she fetched a long ruler from the holder beside the whiteboard. "Cabinet, was it?" I nodded weakly. Okay, I'll chase your friend Henry, and then you get back to your work, she said, pointing with the ruler and favoring me with a friendly wink. I nodded again as she knelt by the cabinet. Henry, Miss Watson poked hard with her ruler. Henry, I felt myself grow uneasy. I wanted to say that my teacher had proven her point, that I was being silly, and I should get back to my work. Miss Watson, I said meekly. She turned to look at me. Miss Watson, the words died in my mouth with a whimper. A hand crept out from underneath the cabinet, a pale white hand, and nothing more. I was frozen in place as it scuttled forward towards Miss Watson. Distracted by me, she did not see it. As it crept towards her, the hand brushed her own. I could see the surprise register on her face before she looked slowly down. There was no screaming. Miss Watson simply gasped as the ruler dropped from her hand. She followed it down, slumping to the ground at the foot of the cabinet. Miss Watson, she didn't move. Her eyes were closed tight. Slowly I raised myself from my seat, trying to ignore the bile that began to rise in my throat. Miss Watson, I tried again, more feebly than before. Slowly crawled up Miss Watson's left arm and onto her back. His pale form stood starkly against the dark gray of her sweater. I watched as he started moving towards her neck. Some unknown instinct kicked at me, an inexplicable belief which suggested he meant my teacher harm. I was too afraid to move towards them. My mind screamed that I should. My legs would not respond. Instead, I lifted and heaved my textbook towards them. It sailed embarrassingly wide, landing with a heavy thud on the wall behind where Miss Watson lay. Henry turned at the sound and scuttled back towards the cover of the cabinet. I ran to Miss Watson. Miss Watson, Miss Watson. It was no good. She had fainted dead. She had fainted, her body limp as I shook her. From the shadows of the cabinet, I could feel Henry watching me as I picked my teacher up and dragged her to the door. You ever rent a house that just feels wrong, not because it's falling apart or because the neighbors are weird, but because from the moment you step in, you get that gnawing feeling you shouldn't be there? That was this house. A 2-story Victorian, tucked away on a quiet street, beautiful from the outside, big porch, wide windows, a steal for the price. But during the walkthrough, the landlord, a pale, nervous man in his 60s, paused at one door, a heavy wooden one at the back of the hallway. This, he said carefully, this leads to the basement. You won't need to go down there. It's not safe. Foundation issues. I thought nothing of it. Old houses have old problems. I just nodded. But that very first night, I heard it. A sound beneath the floorboards, like fingernails on wood. At exactly 3 a.m, I told myself it was pipes, or maybe rats, but it happened the next night, and the next. Always at 3. Always the same spot, beneath my bedroom floor. After a week, I couldn't take it. Curiosity overpowered my fear. I found the basement key in a kitchen drawer, grabbed a flashlight, and headed for the forbidden door. The air hit me first, stale, damp, heavy. Each step creaked, like the house was warning me to turn back. At the bottom, I swept my light across the room and froze. Someone was sitting against the far wall. A man, skin ghostly pale, eyes sunken. His mouth was stitched shut with a thick black thread. His wrists were chained to the beams of the foundation. The flashlight shook in my hand. My throat locked, but I managed to whisper, "Hello?" He didn't move. Didn't breathe, just stared. Then my light caught the wall above him. Letters, fresh, red, smeared like blood. Written, "Don't let him speak." I staggered back, the message burning in my mind. That's when he moved. The man slowly lifted his head, eyes glistening with desperate hunger, his mouth strained against the stitches, skin tearing as if he was trying to force words out. I bolted upstairs, slamming the door behind me, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord, shouting into the receiver, "There's a man chained in our basement. Who the hell is he?" There was silence on the other end, just static. Then my blood turned to ice. Through the line, I heard my own voice whisper, "Too late. You heard him." It started with a mirror. I bought it at a yard sale. A tall, antique thing with a carved wooden frame. The old woman selling it smiled when I paid. "Be careful with that," she said. Her voice trembled a little. Mirrors remember things. I laughed it off, took it home, set it in my bedroom. For the first few days, it was fine. But then I noticed something. When I walked by, the reflection of my dresser didn't look quite right. The picture frames were different, tilted at odd angles, sometimes missing altogether. I told myself it was my imagination. But then I saw it again, clear as day. My reflection blinked a half second slower than me, and then one night, it stopped following me altogether. I was brushing my teeth, staring into the glass, when I realized my reflection wasn't moving. I froze, toothbrush still in my hand, and then my reflection smiled. Not me, not my face, the thing behind me, the thing behind my face. I dropped the toothbrush. I ran to the counter, and in the mirror my reflection bent down at the exact same time to pick it up. But when it rose again, it wasn't holding a toothbrush. It was holding a butcher's knife. I stumbled back, smashing into the wall. My reflection pressed the knife against the glass, grinning wider than my face could stretch. Panicked, I grabbed a chair and hurled it through the mirror. The mirror shattered into 100 pieces. I thought it was over, but when I looked down, every shard showed the same thing. Not me, not my bedroom. Each reflection was smiling back at me, grinning, teeth too sharp, eyes too wide. And behind each one, in the darkness of the shards, something was moving. Something was crawling closer. When we moved into the farmhouse, my wife said it felt cozy. Old wood floors, drafted windows, creaks in every corner. But the first night, we both heard it. Voices, faint whispers coming from the attic, like children giggling. I grabbed a flashlight, climbed the ladder, and opened the hatch. Swirled in the beam, old furniture draped in sheets, nothing else. Still, my wife swore she heard them. The next night, the whispers grew louder, clearly. My wife froze in bed, eyes wide. "They're calling my name," she whispered. By the third night, the whispers weren't just in the attic. They were in the walls, the floorboards, the air. And then, one night, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. The whispers were louder than ever, like dozens of voices chanting in unison. My stomach dropped. I ran upstairs, heart pounding. She was there, on her knees in the attic, eyes rolled back, mouth moving in perfect sync with the voices. I screamed at her. She didn't respond. And then they came, from the shadows. Pale children crawled out, dozens of them, their mouths stretched impossibly wide, whispering in unison, the sound drilling straight into my skull. I staggered back, covering my ears, but it wasn't enough. The last thing I remember before blinking out was all of them leaning in close, their cold lips brushing against my ears, whispering. When I woke up, I was alone. My wife was gone, the attic empty, but every night since, at exactly 2:13 a.m., I hear her voice calling from above, soft, gentle. "Come upstairs, I saved you a space." The apartment above. I moved into a cheap apartment last fall. Old brick building, paint peeling, smelled like damp wood. The landlord barely looked at me in the eye when he handed me the keys. He only said one thing before I left his office: "Don't listen to them." I laughed it off at that time. The first night was quiet until midnight. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, moving directly above me. But there is no apartment above mine, just the roof. I told myself it had to be the pipes, or maybe raccoons. But the next night, right at midnight, it happened again. Slow, deliberate pacing. Then a loud thump, like something dropped onto the floor. I stared at the ceiling, heart racing. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp knocks directly over my bed. I didn't sleep. The third night, it escalated. At midnight, the footsteps began. Then a voice, a low, raspy whisper, seeping through the ceiling. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear. It was saying my name, over and over and over. I ran outside to look at the roof. My breath froze in my throat. In the dust along the edge, I saw footprints. Bare human footprints, pacing back and forth. I went to the landlord the next morning, furious. I demanded to know who the hell was in the attic. He stared at me, pale as a sheet. "There's no attic," he whispered. "Not anymore." That night, I locked my door, shoved my dresser in front of it, and left all the lights on. At midnight, silence. For the first time, no footsteps. I almost let myself relax. Then I heard a creak, not above me, inside my room. The light bulb flickered. I watched in horror as the plaster on my ceiling bulged outward, like something was pressing against it from the other side. The whispering returned louder, harsher. I could finally make out the words, let me down. The bulge split, dust rained from the ceiling. Fingers, black, rotten, impossibly long, brushed through the cracks. A hand followed. Then another. I couldn't move. My legs refused. I could only watch as a pale, eyeless face forced its way through the hole. Its jaw unhinged, teeth black with rot, stretching open far too wide. It dropped from the ceiling and hit the floor with a wet thud. The smell was unbearable, like mold, copper, and something long dead. It crawled towards my bed, limbs bending the wrong way, head snapping side to side, bones cracking with every movement, and then it stopped. It crouched there, inches from my face, its hollow socket staring into me, and in a voice that was exactly my own, it whispered, "You're already dead." The lights went out. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. They told me my neighbor had called an ambulance after hearing me scream for hours. When they found me, I was alone. No hole in the ceiling, no footprints, nothing. But every night since, at exactly midnight, I hear it again. The slow, heavy footsteps, back and forth, back and forth. And I know it's waiting for me to close my eyes. The hotel room. I was driving across country last winter when I got caught in one of the worst snowstorms I've ever seen. The roads were coated in ice. My windshield wipers were frozen stiff, and the only thing I could think about was finding somewhere, anywhere, to stop for the night. After what felt like hours of crawling along the highway, I finally stopped at a flickering neon sign in the distance. It read, Pine View Motel. It didn't look like much. In fact, it looked abandoned at first glance. But I pulled in anyway. A single light glowed from the front office window, and I could just make out a hunched old man behind the desk. When I stepped inside, the lobby smelled like stale smoke and mildew. The old man barely looked up at me. "Just passing through?" he rasped. "Yeah," I said. "One night, how much?" He slid a room key across the counter, without answering my question. A heavy brass key, the kind you don't see anymore, with a tarnished tag that read, Room 7. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Don't wander into Room 6. I froze. "What?" He looked up then, his eyes watery and bloodshot. "Room 6. Don't even try the door. It's not meant for guests." I tried to laugh it off, but his expression didn't change. He just went back to staring at the desk. I figured he was just senile, or trying to creep me out. Either way, I wasn't about to argue. I was too tired. My room, Room 7, was directly next to it. The door to Room 6 was only a few feet away. That the wood looked different, darker, like it had been burned at some point. The numbers had been carved into the doorframe, not painted. I tried to ignore it, but when I settled into my bed that night, I started hearing things. At first, it was faint, a scratching noise like someone dragging their fingernails down the wall. Then came a soft, rhythmic knocking. I sat up, listening. It was definitely coming from the other side of the wall, Room 6. The knocking stopped for a moment. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then I heard something else, a whisper. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but the longer I sat there, the clearer it became. It was my name, whispered over and over again, as if the wall itself was breathing into my ear. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and pressed my ear against the wall. The whisper stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination. I turned off the lamp and forced myself back into bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of the doorknob. Not my door, the one next to mine, Room 6. It creaked slowly, like someone was pushing it open inch by inch. I don't know why I did it, but I got out of bed and looked through the peephole on my door. The hallway was empty, except for Room 6. The door was wide open, and I swear to God I saw something standing inside. Not a person, not exactly. It was tall and possibly thin, and its face, if it had a face, was turned directly towards my door. I stumbled back, slamming my hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. When I finally looked again, The door was shut. The next morning, I returned the key to the old man at the desk. He didn't ask how I slept. He just studied my face and nodded slowly, like he already knew. Before I left, I finally asked him, "What's in room 6? He stared at me for a long time before answering. "Nothing that belongs in this world." I left without another word, and I swear in my rearview mirror I could still see the door. Dark wood, burned edges, standing open, just a crack, as if it was waiting for me to come back. Thank you for watching and listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share these stories with someone who thinks they sleep too easily at night.